They say the wind in the red center has 1,000 voices. Most days it sounds like weather. On certain nights, far enough from anyone who'd correct you, it sounds like the land remembering names. At first light, a ranger parked her ute at the lip of a pale sea. Parallel ridges ran away like sleeping ribs. Her name was Talia. She kept it close. Below her, in the lee of a long dune, an abandoned camp waited in tidy ruins. 2 stakes lay crooked. A travel chair had spilled its dust into its own cup holders. A stove stood with its fuel line coiled like a sleeping snake. No panic, nothing flung aside. Footprints circled the swag once, twice, then walked toward the steep side of the dune and became nothing, like a man stepped into wind and became only wind. Talia didn't call. She didn't say his name. She walked to the wrinkle in the sand where the prints ended and set her palm flat, the way you greet a living thing that doesn't have your language. A faint tremor lifted into her bones, steady as a heart and older. She bowed her head and stepped back. 1, 2, 3, out of a mouth she refused to enter. The dunes shifted imperceptibly, crests drawing curves that weren't there yesterday. In the wind she heard not words but the shape of words. She set a bottle of water and a folded square of shade cloth on the campsite edge and weighted it with a stone. No note. The mouths here could read what she couldn't. What the land keeps, it keeps. She turned the ute toward the road and drove out with a name she hadn't said, and a story that wouldn't be hers even if she told it. The day before, a geologist came full of plans and the bright hunger that gets people into trouble. Luke Harrington. He carried a seismometer in a hard case, a trowel, a sack for samples, and a conviction that the right instrument can make anything understandable. At the last roadhouse, before the bitumen gave up and the sky got bigger than your thoughts, the woman behind the counter watched him line up water and snacks like a kid playing shop. Her face had lines from laughing and yelling and forgiving and choosing not to. People who could call her auntie did. Luke didn't. He said thank you, and that was enough. "Heading west?" she asked, eyes flicking to the case. "Northwest, longitudinal dunes. Great set for grain sorting, slip-face dynamics. I'm recording a phenomenon, singing dunes." She considered his hands, careful with change. "Some dunes sing," she said. "Some dunes remember." He smiled, polite. "You mean legends?" "I mean places with jobs that aren't for us," she said. "You camping? Just one night. Cleaner red, less truck noise. Don't camp on the lily of Yarralinya." She said it like a pothole warning. "Wind stacks there and doesn't leave. If the wind says your name, don't answer. That sand is old. It doesn't need you teaching it anything." He nodded, respecting what he didn't understand. "Noted. Instruments only. Everything you think is natural to something watching you back," she said. "If it feels like a mouth, don't put your camp in it. Don't take what the sand hands you, and don't give it your name." He wanted to say his research might help with flood mapping, erosion planning, useful things. He wanted to prove he wasn't the idiot who goes where he shouldn't. He said nothing, loaded his gear, and rattled into the unpaved, the ute shaking its bones into a rhythm that would haunt his ears longer than he had left. Corrugations started where the blacktop ended. The sun pinned everything down. Dunes rose on the horizon, long parallel ridges like whale-back surfacing. He photographed the first crest line and felt the old happiness that made him a scientist, the click of evidence fitting curiosity. Years ago, at a quarry, something went wrong and a man named Miguel didn't go home. After that, Luke promised himself he'd be the kind of expert who never guessed. Instruments first, always. He left pieces out of his report, mercies or lies, and the omission lay on his chest at night like a patient weight. Clean numbers, he told himself. Singing dunes, maybe a lighter sleep. He parked at the base of a long ridge in the Yarralinya field for the shelter and the shadow line, without noticing the even hollowness of the lea that mouths often have. He rolled his swag where the sand felt firm, staked a small tarp for shade, weighed it with water cans. He pressed his palm to the dune and felt heat arrive in waves, as if the ground remembered the sun and wanted him to know how. He climbed the windward side, stepping into his own prints. Sand that doesn't want you erases you fast, sand that wants you keeps you by other means. From the crest, ridges pulled away in both directions. The slip face fell at the angle where grains fail and teach each other to fail, the angle where a whisper becomes a roar. He bagged samples with neat labels because tidy habits save lives in messy places. He rolled halfway down with a burst of kid joy. Grit in his teeth reminded him why he'd stopped being a kid. The sand stopped when he did. The wind hovered like a sentence waiting for its last word. It started small, a hum low as a distant highway and steadier. Then a tone you feel in your molars. He grinned despite himself. Singing dunes. Grains shearing and settling, friction falling into note. Beautiful physics. He set the seismometer on the flattest patch, anchored it with 3 long stakes, plugged in the geophone, gentler with the cable than he'd been 2 years ago. The needle settled. The dune hummed. Lines drew sound. He spoke into his handheld recorder, talking to tape easier than telling truths. Harrington, Day 1, Yarralinya longitudinal field, sustained resonance around 75 Hz, modulating with gusts, likely tied to size distribution and humidity, testing multiple sites before dusk, wind moderate, no visible disturbance. Note, bold geometry is ideal. Ideal sounded wrong out loud. He laughed at himself because later would never save him. He sat cross-legged behind the tarp, back to the lie slope where sand seems to hang forever just before it falls. He heated water and held the cup, breathing steam like it might turn into courage. The hum rose and fell, more breath than song. He tried to think in frequencies, not warnings dressed as practical advice. A gust ran down the slip face like blankets dragged across wood. The needle jittered. He leaned out and watched a smooth ripple travel halfway down and die, a tiny slide. He told himself that again and again for hours. At dusk, the wind sat down. Heat fled fast. The first star pushed to white. Darkness here wasn't absence so much as the presence of something else. He clicked his headlamp on and off. The beam felt like pointing a finger at a church, so he left it off. From out in the duneside came a long, hollow note held too long to be only physics, a shape of breath inside it. He set his palm back on sand. Grains vibrated like a cat purring in the next room. Harrington, he whispered for the recorder, temperature drop shifting frequency. Maybe the sensors catch variation. Wind now, he paused. Wind wasn't the right word. Voices, he said, and smiled at himself. He turned the mic off, then on again. In some places, silence is also an offering you shouldn't make. He ate a sandwich that had tasted better in younger years. He thought of calling his sister. Thought of time zones and weak bars and the way crisis makes you think of whoever you yelled at last. He considered a message. Remember the corn maze? Dad got the farmer to pull down the fence. This is like that, but louder. He chose to say nothing about Miguel. He was tired of unfinished confessions. He held the cup as if fear could spill. The wind drew a long vowel over the slip face. Then, very clearly, his name. Luke! He froze. The needle drew a deeper line, as if the sound had stepped closer. He made himself breathe, the way you do in labs when a beaker breaks and everyone pretends they planned it. Pareidolia, he said. Our brain pulls words out of noise. The wind answered with his childhood name, the one his mother used when his knees were scratched and his pockets were full of salamanders. Lukey. The vowel stretched longer than a human throat would bother with, and still it was his. He kept his voice small. Raising it would be like raising a flag. I hear you, he told the recorder. I won't respond. He laughed once, humorless. That may count as responding. From the bowl below came not sound but motion, something under a blanket, a hand smoothing a sheet, a small collapse. He stood because bodies stand when danger moves gently. He flicked the lamp low and let the light lick the near slope. Ripples ran down and paused, like a dune had exhaled and waited for him to do it too. The old afternoon ripple sharpened in his beam. Deeper now, he swallowed. Wind, he said, naming the safest thing. The Utes' radio crackled. A voice slid into his camp like a guest who'd always belonged. Murrin Station, Ranger Talia, Luke Harrington, do you copy? He had left the window open. The sound grabbed him back into the small square world where questions have answers. He leaned in. Copy, night in, conditions stable, recording frequencies. Copy, she said, the calm of someone who knows worry and the gentleness it needs. Southerlies after midnight, reports of singing, don't camp on the lee. If you can, move to the plateau. You don't want to be in a bowl if it starts to pour sand. I'm pegged, he said. It's one night. I'll be out at dawn. He almost told her about the voices. Pride held his mouth closed, thin and old. Static-breathed. I can't tell you what to do, she said, but I can tell you what I've seen. Don't answer anything that calls you from the ground. If you hear your name, keep it in your mouth. If you wake and can't move, that's not sleep. That's someone asking if you'll go with them. Say no without saying. I'll be careful, he said, hearing in the words how small they are in a place older than caution. Respect country, Talia said, voice easier, as if she'd put something she loved into his hands and had to trust him. If it feels like a mouth, don't make your bed in it. He looked at the bowl that had seemed such good shelter. On the crest, wind plucked a low string. Understood. I'll be on channel till midnight, she said. Check in either way. He clicked off and listened to the dark that wasn't empty anymore. The wind pulled his name out again, warmer now, an old neighbor at the fence. Lukey, heat came behind his eyes. The first hour after lights out, even solid men can be porous. He walked to the crest because doing beats being beckoned. He set his boots where the sand was still firm and slid a little to the slip face, stopping before he could set it going. He waited. The hum dropped lower, rose beyond him, as if sound were walking around him. Grains, he said. Physics. He sat on the crest like a man on a bed he won't sleep in. He turned the lamp off. Starlight took over. Out in the hollow between dunes, a darker curve moved and stopped and moved again, closer, ambling. Not wind, not animal. A person-sized glide traveling under the skin of the world. He didn't breathe for 3 counts. Sand settled back with the sound of sugar poured into a paper bag. Acoustic, he whispered. Then he heard his father's small cough in the wind, the one with a question tucked in it. Son! He shook his head as if he could tip the sound out. A moment later, a different voice sifted up from under the dune, and the hair on his arms stood to look around. Miguel, the gentle huff at the end of a laugh that hadn't made it into the incident report. Relax, Harrington, we've got it. Rock's good. He eased away from the edge like from a dog he shouldn't pet. He lit his little lantern and let its domestic ugliness steady him. The seismometer ticked. He wanted a drink he didn't have. He wrote in the field tin, 7590 Hz, intermittent, modulated by gust, voices, and drew a hard line through the last word. He wrote, "Don't answer." The wind breathed in through the lee and out, shaped like his mother at 12. "You hungry?" A drawer slid, cutlery clattered. Guilt pressed its familiar bruise. He put the pen down and sat on his hands to keep them from finding work the dark wanted. "Okay," he told whatever had ears. "No answering." The sand's reply was a small, satisfied shift. "Good." He anchored a rope to the ute and ran it around his camp in a square, tied 4 stakes. Boundaries are habits scared minds wear like coats. He clipped the seismometer cable up so he wouldn't trip when panic made him clumsy. Earplugs in. He crawled into his swag, canvas over his head, held the last human smells of himself, and breathed small. Humans get used to anything. The singing faded to background. The wind became a steady hand. He drifted toward sleep with the weight that follows long drives and deliberate days. He thought of Talia's voice and the woman at the roadhouse and the way the dunes lay like ribs or roads or both. He woke with the conviction someone was talking to him, calmly, mid-sentence, like he'd only left the room for a moment. He lay still. The air in the swag felt like a lake a bird had just landed on. Luke said the sand softly, like a mother waking a child. Lukey breakfast. The smell that came with it wasn't desert, oil, old shirts, cold metal in a garage. Sun. He took the plugs out. Sound wasn't in his ears anyway, and didn't want foam in his ears if he died. The dunes held a note he could have matched with his mouth. He kept his mouth closed. Something brushed the swag, a slow drag like a palm flattening a sheet, like a dog turning before it settles. He held still like a lizard at noon. He made one breath, then starved the next. A small weight moved across his chest, then was gone. He came up badly, elbows, knees snagged in the rope that made his square. Starlight told him nothing he could use. His lamp swept low and caught lines uncoiling and rewinding on the slip face, like a hand deciding which sugar to pour. He didn't speak. He felt the thing that wanted him to speak had already learned his mouth. He clicked the recorder. "Harrington," he whispered, "infrasound below 90, perceived as human voices matching personal memory, likely pareidolia, acknowledging pattern, not content, not answering." His voice shook and steadied. Wind rising, underslope movement, ridges traveling counter to gravity possible. He stopped. A long, shallow ripple changed how the starlight scattered. It moved parallel to him, closer, like a shark cruising a shallow bay, not hunting, just breathing. The radio coughed. A man's voice came with the weariness of canvas and sun. "Camp 3, you up? Sans bloody singing again, you blokes sleep through that." Another voice, dry, "Not singing, mate. Country talking too fast for you. Knock it off and come in." Luke turned dials, because that's what you do when the world doesn't fit. He found the voice on a channel that shouldn't have held it. "Camp 3, the old man said. "Ted went for a piss and never came back." A pause of someone looking at something he doesn't want to name. "Tracks go to the lee, don't come this side." Old transmission, Luke told himself. "Skip, interference." The second voice came clearer, the kind that had walked 1,000 hot miles and learned gentleness by necessity. "Don't answer anything that calls you from the ground. Don't use names. If you've got a name on you, put it down." Luke closed his mouth on his own name so hard he tasted blood. He turned the radio off because any human voice risked loosening a knot inside him that needed to hold. He lifted the seismometer display like a ridiculous talisman. The needle drew breath. Smaller pulses came regular as footsteps. He crouched, pressed his ear to the sand, though every muscle said metal would be better. He heard everything, grains grinding, patience moving, sound high, sound low. He lifted his head, and a coolness touched the skin between his eyes, like one drop of water arriving and gone. After midnight the southerly came unbuttoned. Crestsond lifted and fell like a curtain. The hum deepened, split. A second voice laid itself on top, a harmony on the third that made his teeth ache. He tightened the tarp. He moved the water cans outside the rope because he was suddenly sure weight on the ground might offend something under it. He apologized to the sand for moving food. He hadn't done that since he was small. The apology loosened something in his chest anyway, like paying a debt you hadn't been asked for. "If you can hear me," he said to the ground, "I'm a visitor. I won't take anything living. I'll be gone with the light." The slope sighed as if someone under a blanket shifted to a cooler side. The wind drew a sound over the face that wasn't voice and wasn't not. If it had been words, it would have been his mother telling him to set the table and not forget the knives. He crouched behind the windbreak, bandana over his mouth like in smoke season when everything was the wrong red. Something pressed politely at the rope and stopped, as if the rope were a cue and the being under the sand observed it. Curiosity is a hook. He slid his trowel into the slope beyond the rope and took a thin slice, exposing the stratigraphy that had brought him, season on season, marriages of wind. He laid the layers open like a book. He traced a thin, dark line of basalt grains, caught for a year, and found what he'd come to see, history folded in sand. He smiled. Wind reached into his mouth with an intimacy he knew and didn't want. He covered his face fast and remembered oxygen can also be an offering. A low throat note rose from the ridge to his right. He didn't look that way. Respect. He set his palm on the sand until he felt only skin, not heart. The radio clicked low without his hand. "Murrin Station," Talia said, calm as shade. "Harrington, how we doing?" He retched and stilled. A woman's mouth on the radio said his name, his sister, S. Lukey. He heard his mother's kettle through a stranger's static. The boy in him turned toward the table. "Don't," he whispered to no one useful. He turned the volume up. "Copy, Talia, wind stronger, recording good, leaving after dawn." Silence, then himself, colder by 10 degrees, a voice with school and certainty. "If I answer, it will know me. If it knows me, it will keep me." He closed the radio gently, like a man shutting a door on his own fingers to feel something regular. He stared into the dark and tried being polite enough to survive. He wrote a note in the tin, hand steady now that fear had shaken what it could. "If you find this, do not say your name. Say anything else. Say nothing. Wait for the first bird." He slid the tin under the rope edge and pushed it a hand width into the slope. The sand accepted, covered, uncovered, and left it, like saying, "Help isn't your shape to draw." He slept with his eyes open a little, the body making its own bad decisions. He woke to a sound that didn't belong to this night, a light switch flicking. The hum pressed his ribs like a string drawn across them. He could feel his name sitting like a coin in his throat. He refused to spend it. Wind fell the way wind does when a different shift clocks on. Footsteps came on sand, not on top, not in his camp. Under him, the rope twitched. A stake leaned and then righted itself manners. He gripped the stake. Pressure rose from below into his palm like a hand through thin cloth. He let go. The pressure stopped. Cool gratitude rose like water. "Okay," he told the big animal, the world was tonight. "Okay." A thin hole opened just under the rope, just wide enough to eat a trowel. Sand fell slowly in controlled collapse. From the dark came the feeling of a word. "Say." He shook his head hard. He bit his knuckles and tasted iron again. Old stories like bargains. Give us, we'll give you. The sand offered what he hadn't asked for. Kylo pit, too steep cut, crew too tired, clock too hungry, Miguel laughing at his bad Spanish, está bien, and Luke wanting not to be the man who chooses fear, choosing wrong because fear and pride wear the same shirt in bad light. Ground giving, machine slipping, that unwilling gift of looking into a person's eyes and knowing your next 10 years will be heavy. The hum came up through his feet like a heartbeat altered by a finger on a metronome. We remember what you bury, the sand breathed, if you allow wind to breathe sentences. Give us the breath you stole. He didn't move for the long minute it took the stars to say nothing new. He set his forehead on his knees. I can't give you him, he said like a child refusing to hand over what isn't his. I can give you... He stopped before he said his name into a sentence that would lock the door. He held his breath until it hurt and let it out slow to see if the sand would take that instead. It did. The surface near the hole loosened the way dry things do when water touches them. The pitch lifted a fraction. The rope twitched, satisfied. He fed it another breath. It drank. He smiled sharp. Breaths matter here. Names matter more. He could pay one to protect the other. 3 o'clock. Wind came hard as Talia promised. Crest sand lifted and fell. His shade cloth made a paper sound. The hum dropped, then split, another harmony laid on top. His stomach rolled. He bandanaed up and breathed through cloth like it could be a wall. The rope between stakes sank halfway. He pulled it taut. Pressure pulled back, curious, not cruel. Take my voice, he said into the wind, louder than he meant. All night, every breath, you can't have my name. The dunes answered with a not-quite laugh, the kind some birds practice, and all of them are allowed. The sound moved away, then back. The slope under his right foot dropped and leveled again, like a chest rising and falling. Between 3 and 5, a man's mind is either his dog or its owner. He hummed into his bandana to give the dunes their note on his terms. He found the pitch and held it like a rivet, adjusted when the dune shifted, held it again. He felt a real, foolish pride. Pride is a weak lantern in rooms this big. Just before dawn, in the gray that belongs to itself, the voices changed. They were his, not the radio now, in the sand. Luke calling from the east like a friend with a find, hand up, smile ready. He turned without choosing and watched nothing move where he knew something was. He unhooked the rope from a stake, thinking he could drag the square, a sled across light. The rope zipped through sand. The stake sank politely. The rope went slack. He stepped over it out of habit. The sand under his boot pressed down and did not press back. It takes very little to tip a life. Gravity introduces itself when it wants. He put weight on his right foot. The sand under it flowed and wasn't fluid. He leaned into it to find bottom fast. He didn't. Something below pressed back once, a hand he couldn't see. He reached out and found himself held up by a surface that didn't quite exist. Say it breathed the sand inside the last empty space in him, not ears, but the back of his throat where his name lives. Say it and he lifts his head. Say it and we're done. Say it. He bit his tongue hard enough to shock the part of him that wasn't brave. His vision narrowed, widened. He dropped to his knees because making yourself smaller can sometimes let you pass under nets. He pressed his forehead into sand and pushed breath against cloth and let it leak slow. The dune took it slow. He whispered through fabric, around each letter as if it had teeth. No, he didn't hear the first bird. He heard the lack of wind that comes when day almost arrives and everything older than cities pauses because it's polite and likes to watch dawn come in. He heard his name in his own voice from the east again. Come on, friendly. And then the patience that had stood beside him all night slid up between his teeth and sat there like a stunned fish that might live if he put it back. He gagged. He swallowed hard. He wanted to call out for a ranger, a mother, a man who didn't leave people behind. He didn't. He held. He made himself into a stubborn little stone in a sea that loves stones because they give shape. Dawn peeled sky from land. Shapes returned to things that had been ideas. Wind loosened and let the hum lighten, then swelled into one last long, lovely note, the way a singer finishes and smiles because the room held the end with her. He faced the pale east and let grief stand up inside him and put on its shoes. "I am leaving," he said into the cloth, 4 syllables with no name in them. He gathered the rope as if threads could be gathered back after a tear. He stepped to the edge of his square into sand, pretending it had always been there. He lifted his other foot. He walked. He did not get far. Later, Talia would stand where he stopped. She'd see neat prints. The last heel pressed deeper than those before, someone leaning back to halt and finding only an unwilling surface. Then a smooth slip where his shape drew itself and the dune was uninterested in keeping it. Her palm on the ground would feel a patient tremor. She'd step back 3 and leave water and shade at the edge and not reach into a mouth. Luke went quietly, the way places that don't need noise prove themselves. No scream. Only sand rearranging itself to hide a thing the way you should hide a thing, gently, as if you might want it again. Air moved into the gap he left. The rope sagged into a soft square like a signature no one else could forge. The seismometer line spiked wild for a heartbeat, then eased into an old, sustained frequency. Low, steady, as patient as a grandmother learning her new phone, and then going outside because wind on your face is better than any lesson. If you stood there later with good ears and a heart not greedy, you'd hear the first bird. It always sounds alone. It never is. 1,000 small throats answer in their own time. The dunes hummed once, twice, and settled into the day's version of answering, which is silence rearranged. Talia came as the sun lifted its hat. She didn't say his name. There are rules even if you didn't ask for them. She found his notes and refused to pretend handwriting could absolve her of learning. She nudged a small tin with a stick, lifted it with fingertips like it might bite. Inside, letters leaned like a man in wind. Do not say your name, say anything else. Say nothing, wait for the first bird. She looked at dunes, horizon, the color the sun makes in dust on boots. She slid the note back and pushed the tin under with the back of her hand, smoothing the skin shut. She laid water and the little patch of shade on the line where his print stopped. She didn't face east to speak any private thing. Men like him too often believe anything addressed to them belongs to them. She wouldn't feed that appetite now. She called Murrin Station. Campsite located, no contact. Marking site, closure advised, no further personnel. She used the voice for official things and put away the other voice that knows how to talk to places. When clipboards arrived, there was nothing to argue that a reasonable person would accept if reason were what they came for. The rope made a paddock for air. The slope had redrawn itself. Wind wore its politeness. The seismometer drew its line. A crisp shirt frowned at it. Machines don't take sides when it would help. They wrote a report, stapled it, filed it under the word that lets certain men sleep. Lost. It is not the worst word when your real goal is to leave a place alone. Weeks later a wind that had slept woke and went looking for itself. It unpinned the tarp, rolled the shade cloth like a small carpet, and shouldered the tin with the note to the mouth of a floodway that had been dry long enough for grass and brave mice. A road train driver with more miles than mercy stopped to lower his tires and catch breath under a sky the color of meat. He picked up the tin because people can't help it. He read the note out loud to no one and put it back where he found it, because sometimes we learn. The dunes are still there. Maps name them and forget them. often in the same day. On clear nights they hum, a low note the way a mother tells a story without waking the house. Stand at the edges with ears open and mouth closed, and you might hear a breath that isn't yours and feel each grain lift when something older than nations turns in sleep. Every now and then a tourist with a drone sends footage to a station. A ranger watches twice and doesn't return a call. The video shows slow surf of sand, and between two ridges a ripple that might be a gust shadow and might be something under the skin choosing a new place to wait. Pause a frame. Let your eyes go soft. If you're the kind who sees faces in clouds, you'll see a line of depressions moving straight where no one walks. Footsteps. Nothing at all. People who know this country don't point at it when it happens. They tell stories later if night insists. They repeat the roadhouse woman, shoulders set like someone who carried water all day and liked the weight. Not all voices are for us. If something under the sand says your name like it knows you from a day you loved, don't be rude. Don't answer. Keep your mouth shut the way you keep a promise. On certain mornings when wind and chance align, Talia parks at a respectful distance, faces east, and lays her palm on the dune. She feels a tremor older than prayer. She hears nothing useful and everything necessary. She stands long enough that turning away becomes an offering. She steps back 1, 2, 3, the way her grandmother taught her to leave rooms that aren't hers. On days when you want to be told what's real, there are stations and desks and clipped voices. On nights when that doesn't help, there are places where the land does the telling. Out in the red, wind learns your name and unlearns it and keeps your shape anyway. If you go, don't set up in a mouth. Don't pull gifts out of ground and call it work. Offer only your breath and only what you can afford to lose. If a certain bowl greets you like family and hums like 100 years braided together and asks, friendly, who you are, it isn't rude to keep your name. It is respectful. It is survival. Walk the high ridges. Leave the bowls for someone else's business. Wait for the first bird. Leave water and the smallest square of shade you can spare at the edge for whoever comes after. If you must speak, say anything else. What the land keeps, it keeps. The rest of us are guests,